Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Vital Descent. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarland. This one is episode 278. Show notes are at vitaldescent.com/278. And returning to the show, we have, I know he's one of your favorite guests, Adam Fitzgerald. How's it going, Adam?
Hey, thank you very much for that introduction, Patrick. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. We've been talking for a bit here, of course, because it's always fun to speak with you, Adam, when I get the chance. It doesn't happen often enough. I forgot to tell you, man. So we met in person at the Ron Paul conference a couple years ago.
That's right.
I'm going next weekend. I don't think you're not going to be able to make it, are you?
Unless somebody drives me in a backseat of a car, no.
Yeah, I was telling you before we recorded. My son is really interested in big cities, and he was asking me how it feels to. He wanted me to ask you how it felt to live in New York City.
Well. I can tell him this much. It's that it's everything here is bigger, and better supposedly, and we have the big bright lights, big city. But there's a lot more to it in New York City than Manhattan. One thing I could say is that there's a lot of excellent bars and restaurants here. The food is excellent, and the drinking water is the best in the country. But it all comes at a price, and that's the thing about New York City. Everything's overly expensive.
Yeah.
And it's bad when the rats in New York City are basically fighting each other over that scrap of pizza because the pizza is not 75 cents anymore. It's $3. And so everything's really expensive. And what basically is happening here is that the disparity between rich and poor are expanding to a point where it's like really noticeable. People are paying $4,000 one-bedroom apartments in Lower East Side. And when you think about it, that's absurd. Because I'll give you an example. When I lived in Ridgewood, Queens, New York, my one-bedroom apartment at one point was $450. I left in 1999. New York City, I left in 2003. I came back after living 12, 13 years in Vegas and 2 years in California, only to find that same apartment now is $3,700.
Jeez. I was going to say
125-year-old brick apartment.
I had an apartment just like that in St. Paul. When I lived in St. Paul during law school, I had a basement level 1-bedroom apartment in a brownstone it was on Summit. No, it was on Grand Avenue. You probably don't know where this is, but people listening who are in the Twin Cities area, it was on Grand Avenue near Summit in St. Paul, which is kind of a premier area. But I lived in a basement level in a brownstone. It was like a 1-bedroom apartment, and the rent was like $850 a month, which is pretty cheap but I don't know, like for the area, you know what I mean? And it was a basement level, and you know how the prices go up, at least in my area, the floor that you're on, right, in some sense.
What's happening in New York is basically they're renting out garages, even in really? 2-bedroom homes, as a sublet or as a room, and basically renting that for like $2,000.
Jeez,
people are living in it, and I think how we could compare this to is like what we're seeing in Japan. Basically, I'm not saying we're going to end up this way, but you can see where Japan they rent out arcade rooms, like a single arcade. There's no bathroom to it, but they're even renting like these sublet like cubicle homes, and it's like really jam packed, and people are basically just crammed into a very small area. That's what's going to happen in New York City over time. And the homeless rate is just, it's like I never haven't seen anything like this since the 70s when we had William Lindsay as the mayor. And if you don't know anything about New York in the 70s, just Google Bronx 70s, 1970s, and it looks like Iraq. And I'm not exaggerating. Every acres and acres of miles, burnt out homes. And it made for movies to, these weird 1970s like sci-fi films that was shooting out in the Bronx because it looked like a wasteland. So a lot of these, like 1990 Bronx Warriors, for example, If you ever seen the movie Fort Apache, the Bronx with Paul Newman, it was really like that. And I'm not saying we're going to return to that. I don't think we will, but we are returning to a more like dystopian Blade Runner type, a future where like it's very grainy and very wet and very high priced and mixture of all these cultures and whatnot, and basically nobody really getting along with each other because depression comes with poverty and all this stuff. And I think that's exactly where we're heading. And I can understand why it's getting this way, but we don't need to get it to that way. If you can understand what I'm talking about there.
Yeah, I do, and kind of like I want to make fun of you a little bit, Adam, because I'm like, well, my 5-year-old son, I don't know how to relay that information to him. It's like, Adam, what I was looking for my son was to say, oh, well, buddy, it's really busy there, and there's the hustle and bustle, but there's so much good food to eat. And maybe we can go there one day, son, except I can sacrifice you to the rats and have you taken by some criminal gang.
Well, all right.
And escape from New York.
That's not a very good message, is it? No, just tell them, New York is a very fun place. It is very fun. There's so much to do. And it has everything that a kid would want because the stores there are great, especially the Hershey store. I mean,
the Hershey, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. So my I don't mean to cut you off, but one of my formative memories and impressions of New York City was from Home Alone 2, when Macaulay Culkin's character goes to Duncan's toy chest. I don't know if that's a real store in New York City. Maybe it was at some point in time. Maybe it wasn't called Duncan's Toy Chest, but it was, I don't know if you've seen it, Adam, but it's like, oh, you haven't seen, okay, well, Donald Trump is in it because he goes to the Four Seasons hotel. And it's, I don't know, Macaulay Culkin, it's got the best and the worst of New York City. It's a perfect movie to capture it because he goes to, Central Park and he sees all the sights. You're familiar with Home Alone, right? I mean, so the plot of the movie, right, is he's like a rich son of a Chicago real estate person or whatever, but they go on vacation, and when they're at the airport, he accidentally boards a plane to New York, and his family boards the plane to Florida where they're supposed to go. And so he's alone, lost in New York City for a week, and he's got his dad's credit cards. So he goes to the Four Seasons Hotel, stays there, or maybe it's not Four Seasons, but it's one of the rich ones. And then he explores New York City, sees all the sights, he goes to the toy store, and then there's these criminals that find him they're from the first movie, but they find him there in New York City, and he, hilarity ensues. But he sees all the sights, but he also sees the bad parts of it when he goes out at night, and he sees homeless people and that kind of stuff. But my son,
in terms of your son, I would basically just say that New York's a very fun place, very big place, multicultural. The food is great, entertainment is great, but I won't persuade him not to come here.
Sure, I'm just teasing you.
Yeah,
he'll be fine. He's still, he's got that wonder about oh, well, Dad, what's the biggest city in the world? Well, the biggest city in the world is New York City, right? Yeah. I'm like, well, actually, I think it's Tokyo, son, or something like that, but whatever. So I guess then so in this episode, I wanted to ask you a bit about, how does someone from New York City, and I understand you spent some time in Vegas, which is also interesting, but how does someone like you get involved in, I'm talking logistically, but also for your own personal interest, get involved in the kind of work that you do? And I also wanted to ask you about how you secure these incredible high profile interviewers that you do, because one thing I admire about you, Adam, is that you, in a sense, you're a guerrilla, and I want to romanticize this, but you are a guerrilla journalist or a guerrilla researcher. Kind of in a sense, you're an everyman playing with some of the major figures, like huge figures, the people you've interviewed and the research that you've done, grappling with this crazy stuff that just seems like it should be beyond your status in the world, if I can say that in the most, complimentary way possible.
Yeah, I think you're definitely head on, and I'll answer it as straightforward as I can without romanticizing you back.
Sure.
Right? Thank you very much for it. But no, Patrick, not to reiterate or bore your audience, is that I came into 9/11, through the study of monotheism, way back in the early 2000s, and it was through a life change of mine because as we were talking before we hit the record, I'm an atheist, but I used to be an anti-theist, and that changed because I saw myself as turning into the people I despised most, which was overly religious. And so even though I'm still atheist, I do tend to have a little bit more clearer understanding of religion today, and I did, 19, 20 years ago. Through that, somehow, I started my journey into the events of September 11, 2001. It was only because, for one, I was there when it happened, not in Lower Manhattan, but on top of my apartment, to see the partial of the attacks. And also, too, um, I was more interested in the who, what, when, where, why. Like, when I first came across these forums like James Randi Foundation, they were talking about, the physics of how these towers came down. I'm like, oh my God, that's one thing I'm not good at is physics and metallurgy and, stuff of this nature. And so I was like, I want to know why these people would pilot these planes to begin with and crash them knowing they were going to die. What made them do that? To me, that was much more of an interesting angle, the motivations. And when I started researching this area, I didn't go into 9/11 researching that the US government was guilty. I didn't know who was guilty. I didn't know who was innocent. And so because I wasn't persuaded by any type of, humanistic worldview, I basically just had a clean slate and said, I'm going to compile the information and process it through the scientific method to see if it's verifiable information or not. And I'll make a decision there. Well, I could tell you right now, after 18 years of studying, reading, tens of thousands of documents and files and whatnot, I still don't have a clear picture of who's innocent, who's guilty. Now, does that mean that I don't believe in hijackers? No, I think, the planes were definitely hijacked and that there was an order to hijack them. And I think that the 9/11 operation itself was planned by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. But does that mean I'm agreeing to the official narrative? A lot of people would like to think that that is, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's not. And I'll tell you why. And that's because basically there is no such thing as an official narrative. Now, to a lot of people, that seemed like, well, that's absurd. We have the 9/11 Commission. Yes, we do. We have the Joint House Inquiry. We also have the Inspector General reports of the CIA and the FBI. But basically, did they ascertain all the information? No. And even with the commissioners themselves, like co-chairs Thomas Kean and Lee Hamilton, they basically say that we weren't allowed to look at certain information because the State Department was not providing it or declassifying it in a time that we told them to. Why? Now, that's the thing that we should be asking ourselves. Well, it's clear why, because the latest revelations, which have been the biggest revelations of my lifetime, basically stated that there was an illegal operation happening inside the United States. It involved a domestic arm, the CIA, and a foreign intelligence service. And there were two of them. One was Israel and one was Saudi Arabia. Now, people are going to be saying, well, that's going off the reservoir here. You're a fringe conspiracy theorist? No. Again, I don't have a persuasion of sorts. I process information. And what I want from my audience is basically not to inform them about belief or superstition. I want them to have power. And and I'm not talking about positions of politics or any type of administrative field. Power comes from information. The most powerful agencies on the face of this earth are not banking cartels. They're not foreign cartels. They're not the military industrial complex. They're not even world leaders. They're people with information, sensitive information. And if the Epstein case wasn't really telling you of that here you have world leaders allegedly in contact with minors. Well, I don't care who you are, the president or the prime minister's son or a family to the heir of the British royal crown. You are now in a position to be compromised and have your life ruined by who? By a person who's filming you on the other side of that wall, who's not even in a position of authority, but he has information. And that information can govern and destroy reputations and livelihoods all around the world. And so the intelligence services are the most powerful agencies on the face of the earth. And what am I going at here? Is that the 9/11 attacks shouldn't have happened if the information was acted upon, that the hijackers were inside the United States. Don't take my word for it. Take it for the words of the biggest whistleblower of my time, Thomas Drake, the former senior executive of the NSA, who said that the NSA had so much information on every single hijacker between the years 2000 and 2001 that if it was acted upon, if it was shared with the Department of Justice or the FBI, 9/11 would have happened at all. That's outside of any agency. Now let's talk about the NSA. I'm not talking about the CIA, the FBI, Israel, Saudi Arabia. And when you put all these things into context as one, that's an enormous amount of information that's either classified or destroyed before it even became public aware. So that's why I'll say that the 9/11 Commission and Joint House Inquiry are not official stories. They're incomplete ones. And it's the reason why, to this day, like you asked me about, the latest revelations that are happening in the last 3 years. I said that probably that in the last 3 years, I learned more about 9/11 than I did in the previous 14, only because the biggest revelations that we got were never really covered. And very few people, like maybe, Florida Bulldog, who's the best in the country when it comes to 9/11 articles and information, breaking news. They're the best. There's no comparison. And Gray Zone, I'll give them a little bit of credit here because Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal did cover the Canestraro document, which I consider the biggest revelation of all so far that we've had in my lifetime.
And I think we covered that in our last episode. I think so.
Yeah,
Canestraro.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, we did. Yes,
just for the viewers.
Yeah. Donald Canestraro is a former DA agent for 20 years. He was actually chosen to be part of the Office of Military Commissions in Guantanamo. And what he did was basically investigate the Saudi and U.S. angle regarding two hijackers that were inside the United States and Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. Thing about Canestraro, other than the Department of Justice, was this. Canestraro interviewed people from the CIA, from the FBI, and former congressional officials. And he basically interviewed them about information that's classified, not declassified, but classified. And if you look at the Canestraro document, you'll notice that they'll go under names like CS1, CS5, CS10. It's to hide their identity because they can't say who looked at information and, be public with it because it wasn't supposed to be shared to begin with. But Canestraro did find that, yes, indeed, what we suspected all along was true, that the CIA was running an illegal covert operation inside the United States, monitoring who? Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, known al-Qaeda operatives. Now, I'm not going to say with any type of authority here that the CIA knew about the planes operation, for example, in the 9/11 attacks. I'm not going to go there because, for one, that's not true, and I don't have that sensitive information, and I don't think they did. I'm willing to argue that they allowed it to happen, but to plan and orchestrate it with their, you know, with them in the background, no, I'm not gonna go there. But I will say, and I could provide a pretty good argument that the foreign and domestic intelligence agencies did at some level want these attacks to happen because of the simple fact that the intelligence services are acting on the face regarding their respective governments. And their governments are run by people who are influenced by who? Foreign dignitaries, foreign governments who have a shared commonality on how the world is run. And of course, the intelligence services are going to basically not. I'm not when I say the intelligence. I just want to make one thing is clear. I'm not implying that the entire government or the entire intelligence services are in on this plot. They don't need to be. In fact, at the various highest levels in management, would know certain things. And this is basically to compartmentalize. You don't need to know, like George. There are people really who think that George Bush knew about the 9/11 attacks. That guy goes in front of a camera, and he's an idiot. You want that guy to know it's sensitive information? No, you don't. You just need to be a face. Now, could he be aware that an operation may be happening? Yes, but he won't know the time, date, like the specifics. Not even Dick Cheney or somebody of that nature. But they're public figures. The people with sensitive information, real specifics, are either dead or they're in another country because they're not in front of a TV camera. They're not in front of a radio, and they don't anywhere need to be. It's just like the person who shot Kennedy. He's either dead or he was out of the country.
Right.
Right. So you don't want specifics known to public figures. But yeah, in regards to power and intelligence services, Patrick, I would say that they're the most powerful agencies on the earth. In regards to 9/11, they certainly were.
Well, let's go. Just to comment quick on what you said about information being the most powerful, and the 9/11 Commission and what they knew and what they said and what the official narrative is. I think maybe perspective I can provide is in my practice as an attorney. I think in the last 6 years that I've been practicing, one thing that I have definitely learned has been the fallibility of public officials. And I'm not talking in the sense that people in our spheres maybe would be like, well, ha ha ha, these people are just stupid, whatever. No, they're not stupid. They're not always stupid. And I say fallibility in the term of like, I guess, even though these people are definitely not stupid, they're more smart and intelligent than you. And I just made a grammatical error, but they're smarter and more intelligent than you because they are playing in this ball field that, not you in particular, Adam, but just people in general is like, okay, well, you're obviously not an idiot in the traditional sense because you've been able to secure a position on the 9/11 Commission. Like, you obviously understand things about how the world works and the technicals of it. I think it's the fallibility is people don't always like to work so hard. Sometimes they think they're smarter than they are. They're working with incomplete information. But here is the hidden variable, Adam, is that they do not have the time to invest. And I'm not talking in specifics about these individuals because I'm not aware of exactly the ins and out of the 9/11 Commission like you are. But these people are working with finite resources. It's like the advantage that I have in my practice is that I work for myself. I choose how big my caseload is. Now, the district attorney is stuck with his caseload, and that is huge. I have, a public defender would have maybe 220 open files. I have 40.
Jeez.
And I can make just as much, if not more money than him. But I have 40 open cases. And because of that, I can invest way more time in this than other people. And, because they're like people in the 9/11 Commission, I'm sure that being on the 9/11 Commission is not their only job.
No.
So it's a hidden element of all of this is that, well, there, and I'm not excusing deficient performance or incompetence by any means, but I'm just trying to explain, maybe how part of how the world works, not to you, but to the audience, of dealing with this insufficient information, how things like this can create the appearance of a conspiracy where maybe one doesn't actually exist. Maybe it does, but maybe it doesn't. But it's like, this element of information being available or not, the fallibility of these public officials in their workload, in their overestimated intelligence, and working through all the information that people like us, these rogue journalists, have the ability to access because we have a passion, but moreover, we have such a narrative or a narrow scope.
I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
And that also too, and we talked about this before we recorded, was that one thing that we wish we had was a sizable audience. And we don't, only because we're not sexy enough, Patrick.
You're saying I'm not sexy, Adam? I'm feeling silly.
I don't go that route. You're a good-looking man.
Thank you, Adam. I likewise.
Yeah, but I think only because we're so out, we're not fringe, but we're not, too straight on the path, because we do question about how certain things are run in the world. And that makes us not, very popular with anybody. And I think, this is very frustrating because you want to try and like shake somebody with the, proverbial shake on the shoulders and say, hey, listen, this is how, the world is run certain ways, but we're operating on a very limited, available financial and, support base because we're trying to build from the ground up. Whereas the government basically, they have everything at their disposal, as you say, in regards to an unlimited amount of money, and also, the power of the media is that they could broadcast to every single home. We don't have that, right?
That's where they make up for it. They make up for their time investments and scarce, because the scarcity that individuals have with their own, work, they make up for in manpower and resources.
True, but and I'll say this to you too, is that even though that you may not get the attention you deserve, but you can also rest well knowing that your very honest approach and also straightforward approach in regards to questioning authority is honest, and that you can actually take rest knowing that, because when it comes to people like, I hate to give them any type of attention, but like Alex Jones or Tim Pool, large audiences, they're in it for, either monetary value or some sort of other benefit, but they're not doing it because they really believe in, trying to inform the audience possible about, unity against an evil entity, which is the, federal government and the institutions that serve it. No, they're about division. They're about, providing gossip to an extent. I wish I had Tim Pool's audience, a million subscribers. What I could do with that? We can really make a movement regarding, pertinent information, or something like your channel. If you had 1 million people listening to you and the information that you provide, it would be an invaluable source, and they would be a huge benefit, not just to you, but to the audience themselves. Why wouldn't I want my audience, my followers, to have the power of information, the power that, with very little information that I have, but I'm willing to give it freely because I naively believe that with a better future, with a more informed audience, we can actually make the change that we need desperately right now. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, let's go back a little bit then, because you mentioned that you you witnessed 9/11. Have you ever told that story? I mean, in part at least. Have you ever told that story on a podcast or an
Yes, I
interview?
have
Okay.
a couple of times. Richard Cox, who's my co-host, excellent co-host of the Darkened Hour, we spoke about it before, and I think two other platforms where they had me on. I spoke about, I was on I was working actually in Glendale, Queens at the time, and my apartment, my place at the time wasn't very far, and basically what happened was when the first attack happened, we were allowed to go home.
Mm.
And it was, basically about 5, 6 minute walk from home. And we got on the got up to the third floor of the apartment. And, by then you could see, like, if you never lived in New York, your 3 bedroom tenement, you could go up to the roof and basically see all across, Brooklyn, Queens, and even lower Manhattan, and even Midtown Manhattan, if your eyesight is good enough. And there were thousands of people, literally tens of thousands watching on their roofs, the smoke emanating. And then we saw the second plane hit the World Trade Center. We knew by then, it wasn't an accident.
So you personally saw the second plane hit?
Well, I saw the explosion. I couldn't see the plane.
Okay.
Because I'm further away in Queens than Lower Manhattan, but we saw the fireball coming out of the World Trade Center.
And what did you think at that time?
I didn't know anything about terrorism, so like at that time, I was like, wow, what? I was more confused than anything. I knew this wasn't an accident because basically something that happens twice in the same manner is like a program or an operation of some sort, repetitive. This wasn't, this wasn't an accident. Like, you can't. It was a clear day too. Also, could it have been possible that a plane crashed at the World Trade Center with malfunctioning? Sure, and that's what a lot of the people who are against the building of the World Trade Center thought. There's an article in 1968 that was authored by Lawrence Wien, who is the lead architect for the the Empire State Building. And the name of the article is, I think it's entitled "The Mountains Come to Manhattan," and it shows a plane crashing into the World Trade Center. This is 1968. And what they feared was that because the World Trade Center was so high, and because LaGuardia and John F. Kennedy airports are right nearby, that they would actually, because the buildings are so big, that the planes would actually crash into it on on a cloudy day, or that there was some malfunction. That's what they feared. And a lot of people thought that. So, I didn't know anything about counterterrorism and, all this stuff, nature. I'm still in, in a period of ignorance, semi-ignorance, and, I didn't know anything about it. Then until years later, when I just became, interested in, the motivations of these people, why they would hijack a plane, crash in the World Trade Center. That's what led me down to the path that I am now, trying to ascertain information as much as possible. The time-consuming thing about this is not that I've read, tens of thousands of articles and documents and files and, hundreds of books. Is basically, that wasn't the hard part, believe it or not. The hard part, the meticulous part, is researching the information, the pertinent information, to see if it's true, because that's the only way you'll know something. That's knowledge, right? And I'm not saying that, I'm the preeminent expert of 9/11. I would never make that declaration, because I'm always learning something from it daily. I'm always learning something. So I consider myself a student in this field. And I would never say I'm an expert in this field, because I'm always learning something. And I make mistakes, but the key thing about me is that in this, area, is that I will not allow for mistakes to happen. I'll correct them right away. And if only I could do that on a personal basis, I'd be a perfect being, right? I guess. But there's some work regarding there. But yeah, in terms of 9/11, that was my experience of it.
Well, did you witness the towers collapse?
Yes.
Okay. And approximately how far were you? A few miles away? I'm not super familiar with New York's geography,
I mean, well, I would say that I was approximately 11 miles away.
Okay. So pretty far away, but not,
No, I'm sorry. I cut that even in half. That was about maybe 4 to 5 miles away.
Okay.
I'm terrible with geography.
No, well,
I'm awful.
I'm just
it's not, approximately, because I'm 11 miles away from it now, because I use Google Maps to see. But no, at that time, that's why I made the correction here. I would say it was about maybe 4 to 5 miles.
Well, I mean, in your memory, like if you stuck your thumb out, would the towers be bigger than your thumb?
Yes.
Okay. So did you hear anything when the towers collapsed, like big booms or
No.
just the rubble sound?
Yeah. So I'm not that close. But I
Rumble?
would say that the only sound we heard was the resulting rumble of it.
Yeah.
And the one part I also experienced too was that it was deathly silent.
Oh, eerie.
Deathly. That's why you heard the rumbling. And even afterwards, it was a silence, almost like people were just in shock at what they saw. And that would be right. You're not going to hear wailing and screaming. It doesn't work like that. It's not the films. In reality, you see something like that happening. You're not screaming your bloody murder. You're definitely looking at it in terms of in a state of paralysis, mentally and physically, figuratively speaking.
So when you eventually started looking into this, I know you talked about it just a little bit just now, but I mean, suffice to say that quote unquote regular people, when they think about a good Friday night or a good Saturday night or getting home from work, the first thing they think of might be watching reality television or a cooking show or, grabbing a glass of whiskey or something and unwinding. What is it about you that, I mean, even me thinking now, like on a Friday night, I don't want to sit down and read the 9/11 Commission report. Like, what is it about you, Adam, that, is it entertaining to you? Like, what is the drive behind you where you're like, well, I want to know this, so I'm going to sit down and read it on, after a long shift at work?
That's a really good question. So I want to answer it in the respect it deserves without sounding too boring, I guess, and also egotistical. I wanted to know. That's it. Simple as that. Because I'm not complacent. In this field, especially, the drive to know, even with like any type of especially in the field of like criminal psychology or world history, I'm not content with some information. I need to know more. And this the great author Clive Barker, he wrote the books of blood,
Yeah.
basically for the films of Hellraiser came out. And there's this part in Hellraiser 2 where basically there's this doctor, Dr. Chenard, that he wants to understand what the box was about, what the afterlife was about. And there's one part where he's going through it. He's like in hell and he's experiencing it. It's not as as entertaining as he thought. And the woman who brings him there, she goes, "But I thought this is what you wanted. You wanted to see, you wanted to know. And now you know." Well, I'm not comparing myself to Dr. Chenard. I'm not in the hell as I feel, but I need to know as much as I want to know. I'm not content, in other words, with the 9/11 explanation, with the commission explanation, or the Joint House explanation. There's so much more to know. And we can, if we put aside our persuasive worldviews and just took the information and read it as is, and then, like as you say, be meticulous in ascertaining the information and driving it through the scientific method to see if what you're reading is actually true or not. It's the only way you're going to find out what's true or not is to be not persuaded by worldview and to basically test the information to see if it's, legit fact or fiction. That's what drove me. And as dry as uninviting as that is, it's the blunt truth. And I'm not saying that, I'm a true, person or whatnot. It's not about my psychology at all. It's about what drives me in this field is that there's so much more to know. And with each bit of information that you know, it's really depressing. So it's not entertaining, as you say, you get any entertainment from it. No, I don't. And this is what damaged my psyche over time, I could say. That it made me very unemotional. And I was very unemotional. Even when I was younger, I knew something was a little bit off, but this made me just, this doesn't have to be a reflection of yourself or anybody else listening. And that's why I'm just speaking for myself, basically. But the information I've come across is basically all this, the 9/11 attack could have been stopped. And that's just with the information that we have now, very little. Now, just imagine the information that we're not having, that is classified, that I think exists, is a much more horrible perception, much more horrible reality. Maybe that's the reason why the world governments and the institutions that are persuaded by it and serve under it doesn't want us to know anything. They want us to believe all sorts of things. Well, the hijackers are alive. Were they even on the planes? Were the planes even real? Did the towers come down by controlled demolition? Were there bombs? Was it space beams? Was it through the Hutchinson effect? Was the CIA involved? Was the NSA involved? Was the FBI? You can believe whatever you want. But knowledge, to know something, well, they're not going to share that with you. Because to do that would be to shoot themselves in the back.
Well, I think what you said earlier is it dovetails really well with our last interview with your co-host, Richard Cox, about, keeping an open mind, but also using different theories to play off each other to try to have a better understanding of the whole. I think is really interesting. And I guess I have to say I'm a little bit surprised that you don't say that, you're saying it's not even because you're not into this necessarily even because you think it's entertaining, because I'm into all sorts of, if you could see, Adam, you and I are similar because we're both into heavy metal, like incredibly heavy metal. And I would think like, Adam, well, shit. If you're into Cannibal Corpse or like, I don't know, name Suffocation or name your Suffocation. That's a good New York City band. Obituary, a good Florida death metal band. Wouldn't you be into the morbid curiosity about, something that claimed lives? Or, I could even say, Adam, what is it? Is it a trauma response in particular to you witnessing like an atrocity the way that you did? And that's not even it. It seems like from what you're saying, or even the sheer entertainment of true crime, where like I'm the morbid curiosity of like I want to hear all these stories, but I definitely also understand though the need to know why, to parse that out, because it's like seems like there has to be something driving you behind this, because like it's, and I don't mean to make you feel abnormal, but it's like, I hope you're not offended by me saying it's not normal for someone to, be looking into it so closely. And God knows I'm not, because look at my catalog.
Right. No, it's not an offensive question. Yes, you'd be right, actually. It's very unusual to look at one specific thing in history.
Yeah.
Very intently without any type of personal benefit from it. The benefit I get from it is sharing information with people, because I know that by empowering people with information, I'm trying to build a movement, a real movement where people can actually take that information and put the power in where who? The power belongs with the people, not the governments, not the media, not influential and affluent corporations all around the world, but within the people itself. And I'm also naively believe that we could still ascertain justice regarding malfeasance. That's what I'm going to go to here. But I like I said before, not to sound repetitive, but we don't. The only thing we're missing that we're having is specifics. That's it. Not a matter of perception. We pretty much have this, but it's specifics, dates and times and whatnot, and who knew them. It's the only thing we're missing. That's
Mhm.
it. And I can make all the videos I want. I do videos every single day. And basically, it's because I want people to be generally interested in what happened, because 9/11 is unlike any incident in the world. And I'm bold in saying that, it's bigger than the JFK assassination. It's bigger than World War II, because everything that we're living right now basically was a reflection or a ripple effect of the 9/11 attacks. Warrantless wiretapping of every single American, the unlimited support for the intelligence services and Pentagon, the the amount of money that was made from these wars that we went to, especially in Iraq alone, somewhere up to like $5 trillion, more than the national debt of the federal of the United States. It's just it's like, when you think about it, it's like really absurd and egregious. So that'll all this really drives me to, like, yeah, I want to know more. But but you would be right. I'm not taking offense to this, because it is abnormal for a 54-year-old guy to basically just say fuck, going outside. And I think about it all the time. Like, I could go to a bar, hang out with a guy. I've done it before, but this basically has to take precedence because time is of the essence. And one thing that I share in common with you and people at the Libertarian Institute is that the drive for me is basically to inform audiences about what's happening in their name currently or in the past, what's going on. And the reward is sharing that information with people. I don't make money. I don't have a Patreon account. I don't think I should deserve or demand money even. But I'm doing a civil duty, just like you. The civic duty is to inform people about what is happening without bias, without prejudice. You'll hear that in my videos sometimes. And like, I'll say it to drive it. I'm not doing this for personal benefit. The personal benefit is informing the people. It's rightfully so. I'm not morally superior than anybody else. I'm just doing my civic duty as a human being. That's it.
Let's talk a little bit about your methods. So, because I'm curious as to my own, right, about, so when you first started this out, how did it begin and how did you evaluate information? I'm talking about the uber specifics. So like, do you pull a footnote and look at the source material, and when you review an article, do you print it out and make notes on it, or do you look at a PDF on the computer and then have a separate document where you write notes and thoughts? How does that all work?
Well, I could even demonstrably show you.
Sure.
Right
I love that.
I have a bookcase here, but with every book I've ever read, I would buy a notebook. In the notebook, basically, I would put down, just like I'm an old school, like you don't have to do this, but I need to have like a book in my hands. I'm old fashioned like that.
I get it.
But I would take notes. So in other words, this book was about, it was, because I took out the page here. So in other words, this book was about the Islamic Revolution in, say, Afghanistan. at the time because I would write notes and take points about what's being said in the book. Now I'm not doing it with every single point, but I'm, specific dates in history and times like I think that are important. I need to know more, and I'll never buy a book without references. That's another thing to share with
Tell
anybody.
that to Scott Horton.
Right.
I'm
Well,
making a joke because he, I don't know if you're familiar with his big dilemma with the new book. Is
no.
that he has like 500 pages of footnotes, and he's like, well, Amazon Publishing limits him to 1,000 pages for his book, and he's like, well, the book is 900 pages long. I can't have footnotes because it won't fit. I'll have to publish it as 2 volumes. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to derail you, but it's funny.
Yeah, no, you didn't. It's really important to state that because, first of all, his reputation doesn't need explaining.
Yeah.
I consider him as a valuable resource and one that was very influential to me when I started 9/11. Anyway, but in my initial research of 9/11, like I said before, I went with it like an old flatfoot would, well, without any preconceived. I didn't go into 9/11 thinking that the American government was involved. I didn't know who was involved. So I wanted to know why. I wanted to know as much of it as I can. So when I say I run it through the scientific method, the steps I usually take are you question the research, you question the hypothesis, and then you experiment. So in other words, I don't tell people I'm a truther, I'm a debunker, or anything like that. I'm an individual person. I'm a data compiler. I tell people this all like this. All I do is I take information and I try to use my cognitive ability, rational as it is, to basically ascertain what the information is and how do I know if it's true or not. Well, then this is where the time-consuming process begins, and because you can learn anything in an instant, but now challenging yourself to basically what you read, what you've learned, to see if it's true or not, that takes time, and a lot of people don't have time. Some people are basically really short on time because they have a preconceived agenda or a prior engagement, personal benefit, making money or being relevant. I'm neither of these things. I generally want people to know what's happening, but I can't do it in a fast enough time frame because I try to, the best of my ability, is to basically share information that I find that is, verifiable, reputable, and I'll never use speculation as a form of evidence. Far too many people in 9/11 in 9/11 Truth Movement do this, even currently, that they'll use speculation as a form of evidence without informing the people that yes, speculation, is noteworthy. It's not even illuminated or highlighted, but they'll just run with it because they blame the government. If they blame the government, they're going to use every resource that agrees with them, but they're not going to use any resource that basically doesn't agree with them.
Right.
So basically, they won't read into these things. That's why you won't see many. I told this to a certain person in my field, the other day, Darren Harvey, who's a great 9/11 researcher. Basically, I told him, I said, I said years ago when people like Christopher Bolling or Rebecca Roth and Loose Change and all these people, they have a shelf life. This is my perception. They have a shelf life of 5 to 6 years. What I mean by that is that they'll basically make a film or they'll do research and share it, and they'll stay relevant for 5 years, and then all of a sudden, nothing. Like you won't hear of them again. And there's a problem. And the reason why is simple. Is because they don't learn anything new. To them, the United States government or Israel, or a combination of both, is involved with 9/11. It's the hijackers of patsies. And they may have been involved, but they're not, they're not the main players. And so they'll speculate and they'll even use outrageous theories that basically that supports their own beliefs. But it's only a matter of time before their own audience says, that's all you got, before they move on. And they know this. And that's the reason why you don't see any of these people in court. You won't see any of these people relevant now, because everything that comes out now, declassified, they won't read it to begin with, because they think it's a matter of the government's story or the narrative. But there is no narrative. There's an incomplete one. And yet these people and, these grifters basically will run with it, because they don't care about justice. They don't care about the human condition. They care about themselves. And I hate, a lot of people, and I can understand their frustration, say, well, you attack people like Richard Gage. Yeah, I do. I get very pissed off. Why? Because I'm on the defensive. I have to explain to people that I'm not part of this fringe material crowd. I try to get, I won't name by name, but I try to get reputable people that are intimate with 9/11 in the intelligence field that won't come on my show, because of the simple fact that I question the government, that I question certain things. But I'm not a nut job. I'm not irresponsible. I would like to think I'm not. But that's where I put the blame on I lost perspective, like great interviews that I could have had, currently done. I want to, but I lost because of these people. That's the damage. I'll always condemn these people. Like, what they've done is irreversible, and they could still do it. Especially with Richard Gage. I hate to attack him personally, but my God, here's a guy that basically is demanding money. And I'll use his latest, example is that he's actually making a film on a fictitious courtroom using evidence that he can't use in a real court in a fictitious courtroom. And he's actually asking for thousands of dollars for this.
Isn't it crazy how the rules of evidence work?
It's remarkable. It's absurd. And yes, I take, people would say, you could just dismiss it. Before too long, people have done this. And this is the reason why they exist in the first place, because nobody's holding them accountable. I will. In fact, I think I'm the only, currently, myself and DJ Thermodetonator, we're the only ones that dare criticize these people openly. We've asked them to debate. They can't. Because there is no more debate. And I don't do it no more, because I don't care about these people now. I spent way too much time. I spent valuable time, debunking their videos and whatnot. But at the same time, they're not important enough. No way. And I gave them years, like at 5-6 years period. Like, I was really critical of these people. I still am, but not to the extent of, whereas like you can find videos on Odyssey. They won't do it on YouTube because, YouTube has that rule, I guess bullying.
Abuse, bullying, yeah.
A little bit more, like the Wild West.
Yeah.
So you'll see my videos there where I'm openly, like, I'll play their videos. In other words, I made a series called Pause and Play, where I'll do critique videos. I'll use their own words. Show them, I'm playing along the video and I'm commentating at the same time, showing them where they're wrong. Now, I'm not using my opinions here. I'm using the demonstrable evidence against them.
The whole bookshelf full of books that you've read. The other individual, I wanted to work this in, because the other individual that I personally know who has a method similar to yours is Keith Knight. Do you know Keith, my buddy Keith?
Yeah, very well.
At the Institute. I've seen that motherfucker read. I've met him in person maybe 2 or 3 times, but every time I've seen him, he's carrying a book around with him, and which I would love to do if I had the patience or time. But he goes through and sticky notes and highlights that shit, and I'm sure he has a whole bookshelf full of any book he can pull off at any time, and there's highlights and little notes in it just like that. But let's talk, Adam, a little bit about your so you do that for books, right? Like full books. Do you also, like, if you read an article or something like that, do you print the article off and do the same thing, or how do you handle those? Like, I mean, if you're anything like me, you can't handle reading text on a computer screen for anything that's too long.
No, well, thank goodness.
Yeah.
I have patience, uh, and that's what is needed. First of all, if you're a researcher of any type, the first thing that is going to be tested is your patience. That's great, first and foremost. Um, Meticulous, like I wish I was meticulous like Keith Knight or a Scott Orton, if I could use them as examples. Um, but I tend to basically, when I read an article or if I'm reading a document or file, I'll put up notebook, like I'll use notebook, and then I'll make it a point where I highlight a certain thing that I've read in it, and I'll save it in, as a PDF or a text file, and I'll do fact checking. In other words, it's a process. It's a dual process. It's educate you get into. In other words, when you're reading something and then you're doing your due diligence and researching everything. So in other words, you're basically learning it twofold. Not learning it just on the face value. Now you're learning it again, repetitive, right? And this actually is a goal. It's an assistance. It's really invaluable. But far too many people in the Night Living Truth movement, I hate to pick on them, but they don't read. There's a little, in other words, I'll challenge, like, from time to time, I'll say, "Where'd you hear that from?" And it was a certain point about Night Living, and the response I generally get is someone posting a video about a person that they follow or respect, and it's a 2-hour video,
Right. Yeah.
and
It,
that's not telling me anything. All right, so okay, but when you specify, well, I asked you, what are you doing? No, you'll get like, no, you need to do your own research and you just say, all right, when you looked at that video, what did you learn about it? Did you run it through the scientific method? No, it doesn't even get that far
yeah.
because that person will just say you're a shill and whatnot because they don't.
Well, sometimes I find it here's an example. Here's one of my examples, right? This is I did an episode how Israel became Palestine, or I got that backwards. How Palestine became Israel. So I did the whole episode on my show. Here's the paper I went through, right? But I didn't take it the step further like you did or like you do, where, I mean, if I had unlimited time and resources, and that's what we talked about earlier, is the limitations of scarce resources. Here's the footnotes, right? And one of the problems with this is that these footnotes, some of them, it's incredibly hard to track the footnotes down. But when you do those things, it's incredibly important that you do,
Sure.
when you're going through this. But it's like, I mean, examples of, there's my like little notes in the margin there, or if you go through Murray Roth, and I know you're not like a huge like Rothbardian libertarian necessarily, but if you go through his books, you always see his notes in the margins and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay. But on from that, how does someone like you land an interview with John Kiriakou? Walk us through that.
Yeah, sure. Look, when people say, "Oh, you're an authority" or "You're an expert," right?
Yeah.
I immediately say no. And look, I thank you. Congratulations. Really, it's a very nice of you to say. But the only thing I have for most people is time. I'm single. I don't have kids. Yes, I do work, but that affords me to have the free time to basically read as much as I can in the time frame that I have, which is not, you know, which I always found like remarkable in terms of like for you example, you're a family man, and yet you still have the time to do this. It's just to me,
Barely.
the more challenging aspect. Wow, that's unbelievable. That's something I can never familiarize with myself. And something but I can't dismiss so easily. It's just like that's profound to think about it because the amount of stress and pressure that can build from that is just it's ungodly. It's unthinkable because when I read and I invest myself in things like that, it takes an enormous toll on me mentally because the subject is so dark and nefarious. And also, too, that when you read about it, you find out that the information is true. You're like, God, Jesus Christ, it takes a toll on
Yeah.
you emotionally, physically. I can only imagine with somebody with a family and they take the time to research in politics, geopolitics, like you. It's just something that's not relatable to even your audience because a lot of these people basically, you know, are either divorced or single and they have the time to do that. Like this it's just enormous. Yeah. So I the only thing I have over most people is time.
Well, I guess I don't know. In my most self-critical places of mind, I guess like I could do more. I always could do more work in my own mind, but it's like my biggest challenge is making the time. But it's also like, okay, well, in the free time that I do have, it's hard for me to like sit down and be like, okay, well, tonight after I put the kids to bed, and there's 2 hours of free time that I get, maybe one and a half per day. And it's like after the kids are in bed, after all that's done, there's an hour and a half. Do I take that hour and a half time and do I, lay in bed with my wife and talk about the things we need to do that day? Do I watch junk TV or do I play video games and drink beer? Or do I go downstairs and work in my office on researching Israel and Palestine or something like that? You know what I mean? It's like, Christ, man.
But
What
listen, don't think of it as like a I once told this to people that knowledge sometimes is a curse. It's a
Yeah,
curse
it
that
is.
the after effect is that you lose your ignorance. And
Right.
that's okay. Ignorance is not a derogatory term. What I'm saying is that your innocence is now lost
Yes. Yeah.
forever. There's no
Yeah.
return from this. In other words, Patrick, there is no like stop button. There's no reverse. Once you learn something that is your real information, it's pertinent. It's demonstrable, tangible. There's no return from this. You can't unless you have amnesia or you're a general sociopath. You just don't care. But there is no return from this. Generally, the information that we research is very depressing,
Mhm.
and that in its own right, it takes a toll on mentally. And those people will basically say, you know what, forget it. It's too big for me. It really isn't. You may look at 9/11 and say, wow, there's so much complexity. It really isn't. You don't have to do what I do. I take it overboard, but that's for my own interests, right? For you to generally get the information is a general understanding, and that's more than enough of having a general picture of what took place on 9/11 and what came from it. But I refer to a quote, and I know that I ran to the ground, but it's so important, and it changed my life even in this regard. It's a man. His name is E. Martin Schatz, Dr. E. Martin Schatz, and he wrote a letter to a JFK researcher in Vincent Saldana, a legendary JFK researcher, and both men are. And in the letter, it's entitled "On Belief versus Knowledge." And I won't bore you with the whole thing, but he
Mm.
basically says, and I've said it before in your show, I think,
Yeah, I
where
think yeah,
the concept is that you're allowed to believe anything, but to know nothing,
right.
nothing of significance. That is because even though the people in the truth movement, as I could say, if I'm dare enough, they don't like they're comfortable like waving a flag, telling people 9/11 is an inside job. But what they don't want to do generally, if I could be bold, they don't want to know it. They want to believe it's true. They want to believe that the government is involved. Do they really want to know it? Because you know what that means? That means responsibility.
Hmm.
That means it's no longer a video. It's no longer a hold of Baton Island. Now let's go to the court. Let's put these people. That's right. What are you in this for? Are you in this for money? Are you in this for fame? What are you in this for? My error here is like, I, you know, I probably could do more, a lot more, but in informing people, I feel is a basic duty for everybody, and that the courts already it's already like when it comes to Saudi Arabia and the United States government, yeah, there's more qualified people than me that are basically are bringing that to your attention. But as for like that's what drives me. Yeah, that's what because I still generally believe that we can hold people accountable, even though realistically we probably won't. But I'm giving the effort there, and I don't have kids. But for you, especially, you can rest easy knowing that you did your job. And even if you fail, you can basically say, at least I tried.
Yeah. I think you talk about the responsibility. It's a little, I think of it this way. It's like there's another really okay. There is a really good criminal defense attorney who was a little almost one of my mentors that I was in communication with when I started my practice. And I was a little troubled when earlier this year he decided to hang it up. And he was one of the only criminal defense attorneys in this area that was local who was taking really high profile cases, and not just really high profile, but really hard, challenging cases like first degree sexual assault cases and homicide cases and stuff like that. And it's like, a lot of people cringe at that or balk at it in a way that it's like, okay, well, what kind of person does it take to represent these people? And it's like, well, okay, well, without someone to represent them, our system would fall apart. Like, what does our system mean if it doesn't work for, the most serious and heinous of cases?
Right.
And it's like, in this area, one person is an integral cog in providing that machine of justice, and they hang it up. And they're one of the very short list of people in the tri or quad or quintuple county area who can do that service. It's kind of like that on its own, scale. Not to overly romanticize, what it is, but it is that is the responsibility. Who is going to step in the shoes if you're not going to do it?
Right. I mean, there have been previous people far more qualified than me, like Paul Thompson or Kevin Fenton, uh, John Gold currently, Robbie Martin, Abby Martin. These people, Ray Nolashilsky, John Duffy, uh, prominent, just written books on the subject, um, that basically, shared information that is, things that I basically shared on my own, but it's through them that gave me the power to share the information with. Like, I'm not doing any groundbreaking, investigative reporting. I can, it took time that I think that I built a solid reputation as somebody who could be trusted with information, or won't bend to the government's narrative or whatever that is, or to the ludicrous regarding fringe conspiracies. So I built up a reputation, which I'll dare say is like, all right, this guy can be trusted. And that's the only reason why I could get interviews the way I can regarding, say, even John Kiriakou, as you say, or even higher than that,
Yeah.
Scheuer,
Yeah.
right? All I did was ask, but I'm lucky enough to have the reputation that I have as somebody who will question narrative, whatever that is, and won't, you know, divvy it up with ludicrous theories. I'm a flatfoot, as they say, old-fashioned flatfoot. I want to know what happened, and I run it through, notebook, and all that stuff. Yeah, I want to know what happened, and if it takes time to compile the evidence, it's like, in other words, you know, let's just say I use this analogy sometimes. There's a murder, homicide police comes. You would be absolutely mortified if you were on the sidelines and the first thing this cop says, I know it didn't happen here. Because that's what the 9/11 Truth Movement has become.
Mm.
And they basically just said, I know it didn't happen, but I know what happened without even looking at the evidence. And that's where they fail. And a lot of people take umbrage at that. They say, listen, you can't just basically say the Truth Movement was failing. Yes, I can. And not only that, they are a resounding failure.
Yeah, just on its face, of course they are, right? I mean, how could anyone argue otherwise, right? I mean, I'm definitely, of course, I'm taking your side here, but isn't the goal of the truth movement to ascertain the truth and spread that truth, right?
Bingo.
I mean, it's as cloudy as ever.
Bingo.
Yeah.
The one thing that destroyed the truth movement from very early onset was that the official narrative can't be trusted. That was a mantra. Okay, it can't be trusted. So what did they do? Was that in the early years, they had reputable people. Paul Thompson, John Judge, the late John Judge, Kevin Fenton, Kyle Hentz. The best 9/11 researchers in the world were these people. John Gold, these people. John Gold is the only current one that's still around. These people are long gone because the 9/11 Truth Movement basically pushed them aside and said, "No, we need to accept anyone that will challenge the official narrative, including the ludicrous, because at least we share that commonality." But what happened was, in the long run, was that the ludicrous basically fractured the Truth Movement, saying, "Well, you're not ludicrous enough," into believing that the planes are real, that the hijackers are alive, that the space beams, melted the towers but kept people alive and didn't melt them, or that the entire government, everyone is in on it because of Bohemian Grove or some Illuminati and all these ridiculous, fanciful notions, and that makes you believe whatever you want. Fancy as that is, it brings in a lot of people. A lot of people like mystified because it's not demonstrable. It's like it leads you like a TV show coming for more. Tune in next week to find out more. The difference between that and us is that we'll tell you right there, right now. But it's not enough. And that's the horrifying aspect of this, is that the hidden crime of 9/11 is not the crime itself, is that the information that we have, as little as it is, could warrant enough for the people to get in the streets and basically protest.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But no.
Yeah.
It's hidden because of the more fanciful things that people want to believe. Because it really comes down to, do people really want to know? Or do they just want to believe?
Right.
And say, hey, I'm against the government. But that's it for them. They don't want to make the real sacrifice. The sacrifice is this, is that you're willing to put pen and paper. You're willing to say in court, hey, these people did blah, blah, blah. Because now you're on the spot. And now they're looking at you. And that's why with these two guys, Ray Nolashilsky and John Duffy, what they did was basically the CIA told them, and they warned them not to release the name of this individual, and they did it anyway. That's real journalism. That's guts. That's what it takes. Very few people could do this. Because people want to believe, you know what? Yeah, I'm against the CIA. against the federal government. But that's it. I'm willing to say it. But in other words, to take it into action, it's a whole different ballgame.
Well, if I could be so bold as to say people like, maybe Justin Raimondo, who took on the FBI for releasing, I think he did a FOIA request into 9/11 and published some of the information he received through the FOIA request. And they took, I had Eric Garris on to ask him a little bit about this for an interview, and like the details of it elude me right now because it's late on a Friday night. But yeah, taking on the FBI, taking them to the I don't know, the federal courts. I don't know. I think it was an appellate court decision. It was like Garris versus FBI or something like that. Man, I feel so bad for not having these facts on command. But
the minutia of it is like you can be forgiven because when you think about data compiling, there's so much that you can remember. It's just some of it gets lost in the ether of time.
Right.
But
yeah,
I do. Yeah, Raimondo. Yeah, I think that what you're referencing in is that he actually was.
They were surveilling antiwar.com.
Okay.
Right? Here's the article is the FBI versus antiwar.com. Justin wrote it August 22nd of 2001. The phone kept ringing. I picked it up with annoyance. It was our webmaster, Eric Garris, telling me about this. FBI documents recovered through the Freedom of Information Act that detail surveillance of antiwar.com, the staff, and specifically me, Justin Raimondo. Let's see. Asylum. 7 days. Communications. Word about the authenticity of the documents and their provenance. They were posted on a public website. Their form, including the extensive redactions, the acronym bureaucraties, and the lunk-headed cluelessness which dominates the FBI's corporate culture, so to speak, combined to verify their authenticity. As to the content of these documents, one word describes them: bizarre. According to a memo stamped secret, marked as routine, and dated April 30th, 2004, we apparently drew the attention of the feds when we posted a copy of a terrorist suspect list, which had been supplied by the U.S. government to various corporate and governmental agencies, both here and abroad. These documents, including one posted on the website of an Italian banking association, contain the names of those on a watch list, the product of an FBI operation dubbed Operation Lookout. The memo acknowledges the list, quote, was posted on the internet in various versions, but says the FBI assessment was conducted on the findings discovered on antiwar.com. So I'll put that in the show notes page if people want. I know I asked Eric about it, but I should have a better command of the facts. But at any rate, so I got to get going here, Adam. But what I guess just for so you say it's your reputation as being level-headed that lands you these interviews, but what about the logistics of how you land them? Like, do you find these people's email addresses just sitting in dark corners of the internet and email them and say, hey, I'm Adam Fitzgerald? You know what I mean? Or is it through contacts and they recommend you on? Because that's probably more realistic.
Yeah, that definitely is.
Okay.
Generally, the interviews I conduct, I'll read their books and documents beforehand, and then I'll make necessary points I'll raise in the interviews themselves. But I can generally reach these people. They're public figures. Sometimes it takes a little bit, to persuade or to get their information, like certain information regarding their whereabouts and whether they want to come out. Because I've interviewed at least 4 people that never talked about 9/11 to begin with. I think I'm the only person to have interviewed Michael Scheuer regarding 9/11. And
that's very cool.
Yeah, it's like I don't, like I said, nothing I'm doing is, exceptional.
Right.
I'm just asking, the questions, and all I did was ask to see if he was interested. He could have said no, And I didn't believe he was going to come on the show to begin with, because I figured, wow, this is the highest ranking CIA official ever to talk about 9/11 also. And it's such a sensitive area as the Bin Laden. He's the chief of station of the Bin Laden Issue Station. Goodness gracious. Would he ever come public? And he did. Only because we asked. That was
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the only thing.
I mean, very cool. Very cool. So, and when you prepare for these, do you write a cheat sheet? Do you write out a list of interview questions beforehand?
Yes.
Okay.
It takes about a week or two. I'll prepare. I usually have if I'm reading a book, I'll have 20 questions, but I know I can't ask them all. So I compile them into, all right, what's the 13 questions. I'll break it down. What are the most important questions? And I'll sometimes also challenge them on, their authority, because I don't want to be straight to the point, like a boring. I do want to, challenge their views regarding, hey, can you say some things about classified information? And they'll tell me right off the bat whether they can or cannot. I'll respect that.
Mhm.
One thing is always to keep them talking.
Yeah.
That's it. To keep them talking. They want to hear from you. Nobody wants to hear from you. They want to hear from your guest.
Yeah.
That's why I just say the questions, and that's it. I won't interfere them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very good. Very good. Well, Adam, you're a treasure. I love having you on. Always great conversations. I'm going to miss you next weekend. I know that.
Come.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and one of these years, I know I'll see you again there or some other place. So.
But no, I consider you a very trusted source regarding information, and I don't say that lightly, because I don't have many people I would defer to in regards to informing the audience proper about what's happening in their name. But I definitely would say that you're one of them. But it's to, like I said, you're doing your due diligence and being reputable and honest in reporting, and that's to be rewarded. Rewarding is the acknowledgement. So thank you very much. And I'll always come on your show.
Yeah, well, thank you, Adam. And I wanted to add just right before we go, it's like we talk about the darkness of all this stuff and the stuff that we're working on. One of my main life goals is to write a book, right? And I haven't always been able to do that, but I'm working on a collection of short stories, which is something I think that's unique in this space, because not a lot of people do that. But Christ, when people fucking read these short, excuse my French, but when people read these short stories, they're going to be like calling lines about me, like welfare checks or something like that, like a civil commitment or something. Cause it is dark, man. It is dark, but it's like, no, this is catharsis. This is, manifesting those things.
You cannot express it in a long enough time about what's happening in the real world. For example, just, I know we're heading out of time.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, a very prominent person that I'm friends with brokered a discussion with two of the leading people in the 9/11 architects and engineers movement. And he says, just do me a favor. He goes, can you try to explain 9/11 in an hour? I said, okay, first of all, that's a pipe dream. But I said, I'll do the best I can. I took an hour and 7 minutes, I want to say, in a Zoom meeting with these two people. Won't say their names because I don't want to embarrass them. The first question I got was, can you simplify it? And I said in horror, I just did.
Yeah. No shit.
That's when I knew that it was not that to sound too depressing and too general on the 9/11 but for these people, like they're so in, they can't, because one of the guy told me, it was a guy and a lady, and the guy told me, he goes, well, it's hard to remember Arab names. I said, wow. So in other words, if you can't remember Arab names, that means you won't read, like say the Inspector General report of the FBI? Because Arab names are hard to learn. It's much more deeper than that. These people already have a narrative set in place, and that if they're true to themselves, they'll question it, or if they already done so. But some people are just stuck. Most people are. In the Nylon True movie, some people are just victims. That's it.
Yeah.
But to these people, it's much more than that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's another thing, but that's for another discussion.
Well, it's dark. Yeah, it's like the levels of.
Dark, very.
I mean, I don't know if you Gen Z. I don't want to be like an old person, but all these Zoomers, you know, Adam, you're Gen X probably. I'm a millennial, but it's like all these Zoomers. They have one thing they call as an iceberg, right? Have you heard of this?
No.
It's an well, it's like on YouTube they'll have like, oh well, let's do the I don't know, the something iceberg. It's the topic iceberg, like the I don't know, the conspiracy theory iceberg, where at the top you have like the most innocent conspiracy theory you've ever heard about the moon landing or something, and then at the bottom it's like satanic pedophile rings, or like what is or something worse than that. What is the Program to Kill? Are you familiar with that book? Yeah. So that would be like at the lowest bottom of the iceberg.
MK Ultra.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Maybe that might even be mid tier, but it's like the craziest, darkest, evilest shit ever is at the bottom. Yeah. It's kind of like that. You know, this whole thing is kind of like that. But okay, well, at any rate, why don't you remind the audience where they can find your work? And you know, I want everyone to go over and subscribe to your YouTube channel, because now you lost your main channel and you need more subs on your new one.
Yeah, it's you know, I'm easy to find. You know, I'm 6'10", so I'm easy to
yeah.
find that. But yeah, Adam Fitzgerald. I mean, Adam Fitzgerald. If you Google my name, Adam Fitzgerald 911, I come up. I'm everywhere. But if you're on Twitter, it's _ Adam Fitzgerald. And I have a pinned tweet where it has all the links to everywhere I'm at, and you can follow me from there. Yeah, my original YouTube channel was hacked, and I can't get it back. So I'm creating a new YouTube channel, but I want to make this one even bigger than that one. But you have to start over again with the subscriber account. So if you haven't followed me on there, please do so.
Yeah, and we'll put links in the show notes page there for that. So, all right, Adam. Well, I don't want to let another like year go by before I have you back on the show, but we'll connect soon. All right, buddy.
Sure thing. Thank you very much for having me on, Patrick.
Yeah, great talking to you, man.